الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أفضل المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Tonight inshallah we will hear the lecture from Brother Adnan. This lecture is regarding the life of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyah rahimahullah, and if you will have any questions, any comment after, you can do it inshallah. Barakallahu feekum. We need your silent and good understanding. Jazakumullah khair.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala khatamil anbiya wa sayyidil mursaleen wa ala alihi wa ashabihi al-ghurril mayameen wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin. Amma ba'd. A'udhu billahi as-sami'il alim minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu udkhulu fis-silmi kaffah wa la tattabi'u khutuwati shaitan إنه لكم عدو مبين. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أفضل الجهاد كلمة حق عند سلطان جائر أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. Respected brothers and sisters, I welcome you all to this very important lecture of today about a very important figure in Islamic history. And I am about to start this lecture with a very powerful hadith from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam stated in an authentic report that the best of struggles is to speak the truth in front of or with a tyrannical ruler. With a tyrannical ruler. Why did I mention this hadith in the beginning of my lecture is a very important question. From the very start, I would like to clarify that our scholars have throughout Islamic history discouraged rebellions against rulers. Why? Because what they lead to destruction, they lead to the massacres of the masses, they lead to genocides like what's happening today in Syria and Libya and all that. So our scholars, the scholars we follow, the scholarly tradition we follow, Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, what we do find is that our scholars have generally discouraged rebellions against rulers. Because a lot of people use this particular hadith which I quoted, which states that speaking the truth in front of a tyrannical ruler is the best of struggles. It has a context, it has a meaning, and that meaning we understand from the life of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyah rahmatullahi alayhi. This is why his life is very important. Life of such a man that he spoke the truth until the day he died. He went to prison, but never encouraged destruction, never encouraged terrorism, never encouraged the killing of innocent people in any shape or form. Rather, as we will see in due course, he stood for the rights of Muslims and non-Muslims alike. We will see in due course what Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyah was made of. So a lot of people today nowadays, unfortunately, they use his character, his writings, his example to cause disturbances around the world. And a lot of these people use him out of context. As we will see in due course again, they ignore the general spirit of his writings and his works. His life was an example. So who is this man we are going to talk about today? Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyah. His name was Shaykh Ahmad bin Abdul Halim, also known as Ibn Taymiyah. The name Ibn Taymiyah was given to him because one of his grandmothers was called Taymiyah. And there are many theories about as to why she was called Taymiyah, because she was from the land of Taymah in northern Arabia. Therefore, she was called Taymiyah, from the land of Taymah, a woman from the land of Taymah. This is one of the theories. I'm not going to indulge in the details. For the details, you must go to a detailed biography of Imam Ibn Taymiyah, rahmatullahi alayhi. One of the best biographies you can find on him is by Shaykh Abu Zuhra from Egypt, from Al-Azhar. He taught Al-Azhar as well. He has written biographies of the four Imams as well as Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyah. So Shaykh Abu Zuhra has written a biography of Imam Ahmad, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Malik and Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhim. And he has also written a biography of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyah. So Ibn Taymiyah was born in 1263 CE in a very, very chaotic period. Let me explain what I mean by that. The Mongol invasions were at the peak. They were going on for a very long time. As we know, Genghis Khan and his armies entered the lands of Islam from the very east in 1219. The exact year was 1219 CE. And then he went on destroying the lands of Islam. He conquered Samarkand, Bukhara, and one of the authors, one of the historians called Ibn al-Athir was alive at the time. Ibn al-Athir rahmatullahi alayhi wrote about the Mongol invasions and the refugee crisis caused by it. Many refugees were actually coming to Mosul, where Ibn al-Athir actually saw them in person. He saw them himself, and he wrote about these refugees and their condition in his history. So this happened from 1219 onwards. These invasions continued, devastating, decimating the entire civilization of Islam in the east. So Turkestan, or countries nowadays called Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and all the other region called Mawara Nahar, or river beyond, land beyond river Oxus, is also called Transaxonia. All of this land was devastated. Bukhara, Samarkand, Herat, Ghazni. So eastern Iran, Afghanistan, and all of the region of Asia, Central Asia, was nearly devastated by the Mongols. And this region was predominantly Muslim. It was a Muslim region. And the civilization of Islam was flourishing. Many big famous Muslim scholars came from this region. Most importantly, who? Imam Bukhari. And there he is behind me. His book is there behind me. There is not a masjid where you don't have a book by Imam Bukhari. Sahih al-Bukhari, his collection of authentic Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Like Nishapur was also destroyed by the Mongols, never to be raised again, unfortunately, never to be inhabited again. Who came from Nishapur?
Muslim.
Imam Muslim, the second most important of the Sunan, second most important person who wrote one of the books of the Sunan, right? Then we have Tirmiz. Who came from Tirmiz? Tirmizi. So all of these people came from all these cities that were later on destroyed by the Mongols, and other cities, Herat, Ghazni, and the list is very, very long. I mean, the devastation. And I did a lecture on Mongol invasions. You can go and watch the lecture for details. Even that lecture is not detailed. You will only get introductory remarks on the Mongol invasions. For the details, you will have to go to books. So the final catastrophe, grand catastrophe caused by the Mongol invasions, cut the long story short, took place in 1258. 656 Hijri. 5 years before Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyah was born. He was born in 1263 on the 10th of Rabiul Awwal. 10th of Rabiul Awwal, Imam Ibn Taymiyah was born in 661 Hijri. which corresponds to 1263 of Common Era. And 1258 was a year when Baghdad was destroyed completely by the Mongols. And the invader was one of the grandsons of Genghis Khan or Genghis Khan, called Hulagu or Hulagu. He came and he destroyed the city of Baghdad. It is a very painful, long story which I will not tell in this lecture. I just want to mention it passingly because it is directly linked to the life of Ibn Taymiyah. So in Baghdad died many great scholars, many great thinkers, intellectuals. The entire library of Baghdad, which consisted of millions of volumes of very rare, important works which we find mentioned in our books today, historic books today, but we don't find any trace of those books because many of them were destroyed in these wars and these troubles. So the Mongols put that entire library into the river Euphrates, and witnesses tell us that the water became black because of the ink coming off the books. The entire library was destroyed. Imagine the amount of knowledge and achievement Muslims had accumulated in the library of Baghdad from the period of Banu Abbas, when they came to power, because Baghdad was actually established by Abbasids after they had taken power from the Umayyads in 132 Hijri. The year was 132 Hijri when the first Abbasid Caliph Safah came to power, and the last Caliph of the Abbasid house of Banu Abbas was killed by the Mongols. His name was Al-Musta'sim. Al-Musta'sim was killed in 656 Hijri, which corresponds to 1258 CE. That was the last Abbasid Caliph, and there ended the Abbasid Khilafah. And this was 5 years before Ibn Taymiyah was born. So this is how peak, or this is how bad the situation was. This is how, dire the situation was. And the Mongol invasions continued. Despite the fact the Mongols were defeated decisively 2 years after the destruction of Baghdad, 1260. In 1260, in the Battle of Ain Jalut, the Egyptian army consisting of Mamluks, slaves who became kings and generals, they defended Islam against the Mongol invasion. And they came out of Egypt into the land of Syria. They chose a battlefield called Ain Jalut, and they fought the Mongols, and the Mongols were decisively defeated for the first time. Until then, the Mongols were undefeated, invincible. There were small skirmishes where Mongols were defeated, but this was the major battle in which Mongols were defeated decisively. Otherwise, they were making their way towards Egypt. They were going to come into Egypt. They were going to destroy Egypt. They would have possibly gone into the rest of North Africa. The Mongols attempted to go into India, and they were defeated. Also in India, they were defeated by the sultans in India, who were also Turkic Mamluks. So the sultans of India and the sultans of Egypt were ethnically the same people. They were Turkic servants, slaves who were bought from Turkish markets and trained into military arts, and they became generals and kings and sultans. And then they defended the Muslims against this menace, or this huge force of destruction called the Mongols. So the Mongols are defeated in India as well. Many battles took place. That's another topic. So Ibn Taymiyah was born in these times while all of this is taking place. The Mongols are still in power. They are still devastating the land, to an extent that Ibn Taymiyah was born in the city of Harran, which was a very important center of learning for the Hanabila, the Hanbali school. There are 4 schools of thought predominantly, historically speaking, that received most of the attention, and they are Hanafi, Shafi'i, Maliki and Hanbali school. And A fifth school always existed, which was independent of all of these four schools. That school was the school nowadays is called the Salafiyah or Ahl al-Hadith, Ashab al-Hadith. Ashab al-Hadith never strictly followed a particular school of thought. They may have affiliations with a particular school, but never strictly followed, including Ibn Taymiyah. Ibn Taymiyah was regarded as a leader of the Hanabila. He was one of the Hanbalis. But he went against his school in a number of issues because of his conviction from Hadith, the science of Hadith. So he was a muhaddis in that regard. Many of the scholars during the Middle Ages, in this classical period, went against their schools in their rulings because they found the Hadith literature telling them otherwise. So Ibn Taymiyah was born in Harran into a family of scholars. The woman he was named after, Ibn Taymiyah, the son of Taymiyah, that woman, that lady, was a famous female scholar. Even one of the ancestors of Ibn Taymiyah, Shaykh Majduddin Ibn Taymiyah, was also a huge scholar who had written or who had compiled this book of hadith called Al-Muntaqa Al-Akhbar. Right? And later on, Imam Ash-Shawkani wrote a commentary on this book called Al-Muntaqa Al-Akhbar. Imam Shawkani's commentary was called Nail al-Awtar, and you might find it in this masjid. Nail al-Awtar is a very famous book. Many scholars study, many students study that book to this day. So Ibn Taymiyah's grandfather, Shaykh Majduddin Ibn Taymiyah, compiled this book. Ibn Taymiyah's father, Abdul Halim, Shaykh Abdul Halim Ibn Taymiyah, was also a great scholar who had written a number of works. So Ibn Taymiyah was born into this family of scholars. So from a very young age, he had seen learning in his household. People reading books, people writing books, people memorizing texts, and knowledge. Nowadays, like our kids, when they grow up, what do they see? They see Hollywood, they see Bollywood, they see games, they see GTA, Grand Theft Auto, they see Ronaldo on TV, right? Yes? Football? Huh? What else? Wrestling? Cage fighting? Yeah? UFC? MashaAllah, a lot of brothers have smirks on their faces, smiling. They know why they're smiling. Because this is true. This is what we have. This is the culture we have given our children. This is what our children will nurture. This is what they will cherish when they grow up. Even if they look like Muslims, they are, in Ramadan, mashallah, our kids, they also start wearing Islamic clothes, mashallah, because it's good, it's beautiful. Ramadan has a culture. We need to promote this culture. We need to strengthen the identity of our children. We need to tell them about Islam and Islamic civilization and what it stands for. Right? It's good. But what culture do our children inherit when they grow up? What are they seeing around them? They're not seeing books around them. They're not seeing memorization of hadith and the Quran and the Sunnah and books like that, traditions like that. No. They see all these things. They see the father in the masjid. But when the father comes home, he has no attachment to the Quran. He has no attachment to books. Or he has no attachment to our civilization in general. And I'm not, again, saying everyone is like that. Of course there are exceptions. Alhamdulillah, by the grace of Allah, it is the exceptions who keep the tradition alive. Right? Ibn Taymiyah grew up in that household where he saw books everywhere. People reading, writing, intellectual discussions on Islamic jurisprudence and all that. So what time is iftar, Shaykh?
20 past 9.
Khalas. Okay, good. So he grew up in this household, this culture. From a very young age he was memorizing books. But then came the Mongols to Harran. His family, his neighborhood, his city was completely destroyed by the Mongols. And then his father had to pick him up. As a child, Ibn Taymiyah, on the road to Damascus, he saw Mongol horsemen going back and forth, up and down. He saw them. You see, as a child, when you see things like this, if you go to Syria, if you speak to a Syrian child who has seen conflict, that child will remember that, no matter how old that child might become. Even when that child becomes 70, 80, those flashbacks will come. He will always remember what happened to me as a child. This is why war, it destroys a generation. It destroys that generation. You know, those children who were born into war, they will never forget it. So Ibn Taymiyah saw that as a child. When he was growing up, he saw that. Cut the long story short, his family moved to Damascus. They went through a lot of trouble, a lot of problems. They moved to Damascus when Ibn Taymiyah was about 6 to 7 years old. And the Mongols were still devastating all this land around Syria. Not directly in Syria, but around Syria. Haran was in the north of Syria, current-day Turkey, and it was a very famous center of the Hanbali school. So all of these scholars came to Damascus. So Ibn Taymiyah started learning in Damascus, and he was influenced from a number of scholars. One of them was Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi, who was a very big scholar of hadith, who also wrote this famous compendium of the Hanbali school. It is called Al-Mughni. Al-Mughni is the largest compendium of jurisprudential opinions collected in a work based upon the Hanbali school of thought, or the opinions of Hanbali scholars. Al-Mughni is the largest collection of Hanbali fiqhi opinions. And there are other schools who have their own books to refer to. For example, for the Malikis, there's a book called At-Tamheed. It is a sharh of Muwatta Imam Malik. It is a huge collection of Maliki opinions on matters Islamic. Likewise, the Hanafis, they have a big collection of fatwa called Al-Fatawa Al-Hindiya, also known as Al-Fatawa Al-Alamgiriya, named after the Mughal Emperor Alamgir. So Ibn Taymiyah moved into Damascus and he started studying with great scholars of his times. He studied hadith from close to 200 scholars, 40 of whom have been mentioned by Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyah himself. 4 mentioned by him were women. Women scholars of hadith, Ibn Taymiyah took knowledge from them, rahmatullah alayh. So 40 he mentioned by name. As a teenager, he was attending lectures of hadith, and I don't want to exhaust you with too much detail with names and all the dates and everything, but I'm going to mention general things within his life so that you can appreciate what he went through and what he did as a Muslim luminary, as a Muslim example, as a Muslim hero. He was a very colorful personality when it comes to his opinions. A lot of people try to use his opinions for their ends. Sometimes in a corrupted way, unfortunately. A lot of people claim him as their own. A lot of people. You see, when someone is as big as him in scholarship, someone who has produced the work he produced, the magnitude of works he produced, it is very easy for people to manipulate his words, take his statements out of context and stick them to a particular situation and claim him for yourself. They often ignore the nuances and the bigger picture of such people and their works. So one has to be very careful in reading Ibn Taymiyah. You have to read him holistically. You have to look at his works holistically, and you cannot pick and choose his statements from his work, either to follow him or to condemn him. Because a lot of people do both. Either they condemn him or they follow him, and they follow him selectively, or they condemn him selectively. No, study him. Before you talk about Ibn Taymiyah and his opinions, study him carefully. It doesn't take long. You can study his works within 2 to 3 years. You can finish them, as big as they may be. So, as a teenager, he took a lot of knowledge from scholars around him, and there's no point of going through the list of the scholars he took knowledge from, but there were major scholars alive at the time teaching hadith, fiqh, Quran, tafsir, history, grammar, the Arabic language, dictionaries, all this knowledge, philosophy, mathematics, astronomy. He was a polymath. There was not anyone like him alive at his time. even according to his own opponents. They said there is no one like him alive in our times. One of his students, Imam al-Dhahabi, he said, my eyes have never gazed upon anyone like him, and I am sure his own eyes never gazed upon anyone like him. Does that make sense? That my eyes, Imam al-Dhahabi, his student, Shaykh al-Islam, you know how you know a person? One of the ways to judge a person is by looking at his works, of course, his books, the amount of literature and scholarship he produced. Number one, that's how you judge a scholar. The work, not by talking. Talks are good, mashallah. Talks are good. But the amount of research, deep research a scholar produces, that's how you know a scholar. Just because someone comes and delivers fiery speeches in front of you and throws verses at you and hadith at you, doesn't make that person a scholar. That he could be borrowing that information from someone else, right? A scholar is known by his works, what he has produced in research, what is between those covers. That's number one. Number two, by looking at the results, the legacy he left behind, his students. Most importantly, his students. When you look at the students of Ibn Taymiyah and study their works, you think if the student was like this, what do you think the teacher will be like? What am I talking about? Have you ever studied Ibn Kathir's tafsir? And it's one of the shorter ones. Ibn Kathir, Imam Ibn Kathir al-Damishqi, also a student of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyah, he wrote a tafsir. He also wrote a history called Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya in Arabic. Tafsir, when you open his tafsir and when you start looking at the opinions he gives on verses, one after another, one after another, one after another, I can guarantee you can't even do that today with a computer. That kind of referencing. He gives one verse of the Quran and then Ibn Kathir tells you Ata said this, Mujahid said this, Ikramah said this, Alqamah said this, Salim said this, da 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 da, and the list goes on, and you think, how did he remember this? Or how did he even edit this? How did he bring these opinions from all these different books into one place? How did he do that? There were no computers with him. And that's a student of Ibn Taymiyah. Then there are students like Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah. Ibn al-Qayyim, he is known for his works. Allahu Akbar. He wrote one entire book when he was traveling for Hajj. It's called Zad al-Ma'ad. It's a seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. He wrote this book when he was on the back of a camel, not literally writing on the camel. When they would stop and rest, he would be writing the book. He wrote the book when he was on his journey. I don't know whether he wrote the entire book on the journey, but a large chunk of the book was compiled, penned when he was on this journey. Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah. Then Imam al-Dhahabi, a historian, a muhaddis par excellence, the author of Siru Alam al-Nubala. But you cannot understand what I'm saying, brothers. I don't expect you to understand this until you go and look at these books. First you look at them, your head will spin. By just looking at them, your head will spin. Sah, Shaykh? They're like this book. Each book is this big. 20, 30 volumes. Your head will spin. How did these people, let alone reading it, how did they write it? These are the students of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyah. So imagine the teacher. Imagine what the teacher was. So you know a Shaykh by... So imagine the shuyukh, the teachers of Ibn Taymiyah, people who were teaching him. But he collected all this knowledge as a young man into his mind. He studied the books of grammar, books of hadith and tafsir and all these sciences. So as a teenager, he was ready to teach. So he received ijaza. Are you listening, everyone? He received a certificate. He received the authority from his teachers to give fatwa. What is fatwa? Fatwa. What is fatwa? Does anyone know? Brothers, I want some feedback. Fatwa. What is fatwa? Sorry? Huh? decision. Anyone else? Islamic ruling. A fatwa is an Islamic ruling. And who can give the fatwa? A mufti. Right? And what makes you a mufti? An intense study of Islamic sources. Not a couple of books, not 10 books, not 20 books, thousands of books. Thousands. You have to study 4 schools, their varying opinions, the opinions of the muhaddithin. You have to master the science of hadith. You have to master the science of fiqh. You have to master the science of grammar. You have to master the science of tafsir. You have to know language. You have to know pre-Islamic shi'r, pre-Islamic poetry. The list is very, very long, brothers. Very, very long of all these qualifications. Then you become a mufti. This is the ideal list of things a mufti must accomplish. Nowadays, unfortunately, a mufti, you go to an institution, 8 years study, and you get a certificate. I don't know whether that certificate actually means something, but a mufti is someone who has mastered all these fields, right? Ibn Taymiyah became a mufti when he was 17. This was phenomenal. This was unbelievable. Even at that time, when everyone was carrying a book, 17 years old, he was giving fatwas, Islamic rulings. That meant to those people who had a very high standard of learning, that meant this man was an extraordinary human. Why was he like this? When other children would be playing, he would be reading and memorizing books. When he was a child, once his father told him, why don't you go on the street and play with other children? He said, I am busy reading. Then his father offered him to take him somewhere with other children, go for a picnic, something like that. He said, no, I will stay home. I will read. His father came back. He asked him, what did you do? He said, I finished this entire volume, and he gave the volume to his father. When he was absent, his father was absent, Ibn Taymiyah, as a child, finished the entire volume. As they say in the Urdu language, badi mushkil se hota hai chaman mein dida aur paida. It is very difficult to produce people like that. It is very difficult. So Ibn Taymiyah, when we start looking into his mind and his level of learning, it is not possible for me to do justice in this short sitting. So very quickly we move on. So as a 30 years old man, Ibn Taymiyah had already become very prominent. He was born in 1263. By 30, he was a well-established scholar. Even his elders respected him for the level of his understanding of Islamic sources. And for that reason, when you become big in knowledge, you are put in situations where you have to give fatwas, where you have to give your opinions on matters. And that landed Ibn Taymiyah from 30 years onwards, from the age of 30 onwards, until when he died in 1328, when he was in his 60s. He lived a very difficult life because he had to give opinions on matters, and those opinions very often landed him in prison. There are estimates that Ibn Taymiyah went to prison about 8 times. 8 times, and he spent 6 years, at least 6 years and maximum 14 years of his life in prison. Different people have given different time span for his imprisonment, but he went to prison at least for 6 years, and he was imprisoned 8 times throughout his career. I will request from the brothers to keep it very silent and peaceful. When you are doing your business in the back, keep it very peaceful and calm, inshallah. So, why was he sent to prison? What happened? Firstly, Ibn Taymiyah was asked to join the campaigns waged by the rulers at the time against a number of different hostile powers. For example, there were Alawis in the mountains of Lebanon. Alawis were a very strong political entity at the time in the Middle East, and they were causing a lot of problem for the Muslims around the region. In fact, one of the groups called the Assassins. You know the word assassins? You know assassins? The youngsters would know. Assassin's Creed, huh? Who plays that game? Assassin's Creed. Put your hands up. Assassin's Creed, huh? MashaAllah. There are people there, MashaAllah. You know the word assassin, where it came from? The word assassin now is an English word which means someone who is hired to kill others, right? Yeah, a hired killer. It means an assassin, to put it in simple terms. But this word comes from a group known as the Hashashins. The word was Hashashin, and Hashashin became assassin. Who were the Hashashins? Hashashins were Alawis or Nazaris, who were a group of people who lived in the Middle East, in the mountains of Syria and Lebanon, who were conducting assassinations of important political leaders. Everyone was sick of them. Everyone was terrified of them. They were basically a group of terrorists who would go and commit terrorist acts against leaders. Not that others were not terrorists. Everyone was committing acts of terrorism at the time, including the Crusaders and others. All the people were involved in. I mean, we cannot apply our definition of political realities today to those people. If we start to apply it to the standards we have today to them, then every single one of them is out, gone. So we have to look at people of the past in their own situations, what they were facing, what they were going through, what the circumstances of their times were. So Ibn Taymiyah was asked to support the ruler of Syria at the time to subdue this menace, and he joined the ranks of the ruler. Then Ibn Taymiyah was also asked to give the fatwa of jihad against the Mongols who were devastating all this land. Ibn Taymiyah personally joined the struggle against the Mongols, because the Mongols were destroying the Muslims and their lands and their civilization. So Ibn Taymiyah rahmatullah alayh, he gave a fatwa. In fact, some Mongol rulers had claimed to be Muslims at the time. One of them was Kazan. Kazan was the ruler of eastern Iran at the time, who was a Mongol by origin. He was a descendant of Genghis Khan, and he had allegedly accepted Islam. But in everything he did was against Islam. Everything he did was against Islam, to an extent that he started invading Muslim territories. And the law he was governing by was the law of Genghis Khan. He didn't care about the Sharia, the Islamic law. So Ibn Taymiyah went to see him personally. And Kazan, the Mongol leader at the time of eastern Iran, one of the most powerful leaders in the region, in the Middle East and beyond, at the time was Kazan, or Ghazan, also known as Ghazan. Ghazan Khan. So he invaded the land of Syria 3 times in the early 1300s. In the early 14th century, early 1300s, when Ibn Taymiyah was in his 40s. Or he was not 40 yet, actually. He was in late 30s. So Ibn Taymiyah rahmatullah alayhi went to see him in person. When Kazan came near the land of Syria, Ibn Taymiyah was known for his courage. He was known for his selflessness. He was known for his defense of the Muslims and the non-Muslims. Why did he go to see Kazan? Because Kazan had, during an incursion into Syria, he had taken Muslim as well as Christian prisoners. He had taken prisoners from the land of Syria. So Ibn Taymiyah went to speak to him in person to free these captives from his captivity. And the captives included Muslims as well as non-Muslims, dhimmis who were paying jizya to the Muslim state. So Ibn Taymiyah was a man who not only defended Muslims, he defended non-Muslims. So he went to Kazan. Qazan was in his tent with his entourage, with his generals and his followers. So when Ibn Taymiyah went to his tent, he took a delegation of Muslim scholars with him. These scholars, they were terrified. They had heard about Qazan, that Qazan is a very, very dangerous personality. He was known for executing people on the spot. Ibn Taymiyah didn't care about any of that. He didn't care about any of that. This is how selfless and this is how brave this man was. He walks into the tent and he starts speaking to Qazan as if he is a nobody. And he tells him, how dare you come to this land and start killing Muslims? And you claim to be a Muslim? You claim to be a Muslim? While your ancestors like Hulagu or Hulaku were non-Muslims, they kept their word with Muslims. When they gave their word, they kept it. And you claim to be a Muslim and you claim to have scholars and muhaddiseen and ulama with you, and you are behaving in a way which is not befitting of a Muslim. What kind of Muslim are you? While Ibn Taymiyah was addressing him like this, Qazan became so angry, and Ibn Taymiyah was so close to him that Ibn Taymiyah's knees were joined with the knees of Qazan. Yani he went literally, as we say, talking in someone's face. Talking in someone's face. When other scholars who went with Ibn Taymiyah saw this level of courage, they started to gather their clothes. You know what that means in that situation? What does that mean? They started to gather their clothes. These scholars, back in the day, people used to wear, mashallah, thobes, but those thobes were not like, mashallah, our thobes today. Our thobes are very, straight. Their thobes were long, their thobes were lavish, they had extra cloth hanging with them. So they started to gather their gowns and their clothes. You know why? Because now they were expecting Qazan to command his executioner, because the executioner was ready with the sword. That how dare this man from Damascus come to the ruler of eastern Iran and Syria and the rest, all of them, talk like this in front of him. So they were now expecting the executioner to draw the sword through Ibn Taymiyah's neck. Ibn Taymiyah didn't care. He could see all that around him. He could see the executioner, he could see the entourage of Qazan, but Qazan was so awestruck. He was so awestruck by the ru'b of the Shaykh, by his, how can you put it, the strength of his character, that he could not say anything to Ibn Taymiyah. And Ibn Taymiyah left the tent with the prisoners freed. So the Christians as well as the Muslims were freed by Qazan, and when he came out, the scholars, they said to Shaykh al-Islam, they said to Ibn Taymiyah, did you want us to be killed? Is this why you brought us here? You wanted us to be killed? He said, trust in Allah. When you fear Allah, people will fear you. When you fear Allah, others will fear you. So trust in Allah. So Ibn Taymiyah's trust in Allah was so strong that he was dealing with one of the biggest killers of the time, and he had no fear of him. And that's why Qazan had maximum respect for this man. He said, this man, he deserves the respect he has among you people. So Ibn Taymiyah went back to Damascus. Cut the long story short, he fought against the Mongols in person. There was a battle which the Mongols eventually lost. Ibn Taymiyah himself in person, he was in the battlefield running towards the arrows. You know where the arrows were coming down? Ibn Taymiyah was rushing that way. He wanted to be killed shaheed in this battle. Ibn Taymiyah wanted to be martyred in this battle, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had another plan for him. He survived the battle, early 1300s. Later on, Ibn Taymiyah rahmatullah alayhi was put through a lot of trials due to his opinions. He was put in prison a number of times. Scholars have addressed the reasons as to why Ibn Taymiyah was imprisoned so many times, and they have listed the reasons. One of the reasons is jealousy. A lot of scholars who were alive at the time, who did not see eye to eye with Ibn Taymiyah, they were jealous of his advancement, his achievements in deen, and otherwise people of Damascus, they were willing to die for him. You know, when Allah loves you, people also love you. When Allah loves you, Allah puts that love into the hearts of the Muslims, and Muslims also start to love you. Allah will show you this. Allah will show you this. When Allah loves someone, Allah will honor that person. Wallahi, I saw this Ramadan. Last Saturday, today is Jummah. Last Saturday, my mother-in-law passed away, rahmatullahi alayha. My mother-in-law passed away, a housewife, a simple woman, very simple woman, right? And she died in Ramadan, obviously, last Saturday. And 5 days before that, she was walking. I saw her walking with my own eyes. She was an advanced cancer patient. Doctors had told her that she will die soon. But she looked fine to an extent that we thought she will survive the month of Ramadan, maybe another month. But Allah was keeping her for Ramadan. Immediately, something happened to her and she was taken. She went. She passed away, rahmatullahi alayha. But the point I want to mention very quickly is that the amount of response, brothers, we received from around the world. We heard messages from the Shaykh in Saudi Arabia making, dua for her in Haram, right? There are Shaykh from Qatar, they're messaging us, they're making dua in Qatar. People are praying janazah for her in South Africa. A woman who is not a public figure. She's not a public figure. And I was thinking, why is Allah honoring her in this way? Of course, I knew her good deeds. Some of them were known to me. But maybe there were things we didn't know about her. We found out when she died. People were calling us from all over the world, around the world. I mean, particularly, mainly from Pakistan, where she was from, that she was taking care of orphans. She was taking care of her poor relatives. She would send them money randomly. Every time they asked her, she'd give them money. She bought a house for an orphan family, a widow with children who were orphans. She bought a house for them for thousands of pounds. Over 10,000 pounds she spent on this family to buy them a house. This woman, rahmatullahi alayha. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored her in ways we could not imagine. The first honor is death in the month of Ramadan. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, إِذَا جَاءَ رَمَضَانُ فُتِّحَتْ أَبْوَابُ الْجَنَّةِ وَغُلِّقَتْ أَبْوَابُ النَّارِ وَصُفِّدَتْ الشَّيَاطِينَ. So when Allah loves you, Allah will honor you. Allah will show others that Allah has honored you. And Allah loves you for your deeds, your charity, most importantly. Sadaqah jariyah, whether it's in books and knowledge like Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyah left, or whether it's in charity, Sadaqah jariyah. So, the time of iftar is getting close. I'm going to have to summarize very quickly. Ibn Taymiyah was put through a lot of trouble because of his opinions. One of the opinions he gave was that it is not allowed to make ziyarah for a Muslim of any other place than the three sacred mosques: Masjid al-Haram, Masjid al-Nabawi, and Masjid al-Aqsa. According to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that a Muslim visits three mosques, and each mosque has a reward for praying in it. But other than that, a Muslim with the niyyah of ziyarah, visiting or pilgrimage, you cannot go. It is not allowed. And controversy was sparked. Many people attacked him who didn't like him for this opinion, because people believed in going to the grave of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with the niyyah of making a visit or a pilgrimage to the grave of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So those people attacked him. They said no. But Ibn Taymiyah was saying nothing against Sharia, nothing against the Quran and the Sunnah. So he was put in prison for that. That was the last time he was put in prison. And before that happened, he gave another fatwa that talaq, when a man gives talaq to his wife 3 times or 50 times or 1,000 times in one go, that talaq is one talaq. It is not 3 talaq. It is not ghair raj'i. When you give talaq like that, it counts as one talaq. It does not count as 3 talaqs, as some schools of thought have you believe, right? And Ibn Taymiyyah's opinion was based upon the prophetic tradition. The Prophet ﷺ had stated, when a companion came to him, asked him, Ya Rasulullah, I gave 3 talaqs to my wife in one majlis. The Prophet ﷺ said, that's one talaq. Same was said by Abdullah bin Abbas radiallahu anhu. Sahih Muslim, there's a hadith there. So Ibn Taymiyah based his opinion upon this matter, which most Muslims fortunately uphold today. 4 schools of thought were unanimous after Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu, because people were playing games with talaq. They were playing games. They were giving 3 talaqs and they were going back to the... So Umar, he said, anyone who gives 3 talaqs from now on, in the time of Umar, he said, this is a talaq done. So this was Umar's opinion radiallahu anhu. Later on, 4 schools adopted this opinion, including the Hanbalis. And Ibn Taymiyah went against his own school in this matter. And then he was imprisoned because of this opinion, even though the opinion was based upon authentic sunnah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And because people did not follow this opinion, many evil things were introduced later on. One of those is called halala. In the Indian subcontinent, predominantly, when a man gives 3 talaqs to his wife, it is considered to be a complete talaq. Khalas, it's finished now. The wife cannot be remarried. And now when the man comes back to his senses, and this is against the Quran as well. At-talaqu marratan. The Quran says at-talaqu marratan. Talaq is in sequence. It is turn by turn. It is not like a train. Talaq. Anti taliq. Khalas, go. Get lost. No, this is not how talaq works. So what happened? A lot of these people who followed that opinion that 3 talaqs means finished, they came up with this solution that a woman gets married to another man for 1 night or for 2 days. She spends time with him and then she is divorced by the second man and she goes back to the first. The Prophet ﷺ in an authentic report condemned this behavior. He actually condemned it in the severest of words, this behavior or this way of doing things. The Prophet said, halala, may the curse of Allah be upon the one who does halala and who it is done for. The one who does it and who it is done for, may the curse of Allah be upon those. Sahih, authentic hadith, and people still do it. And this happened because people went away from the sunnah. And Ibn Taymiyah wanted to bring the sunnah back, that 3 talaqs or 1 million talaqs in one sitting, even if you play a tape, a CD with talaq going all day, broken record, it doesn't matter. It is 1 talaq. It doesn't matter. It will only count as 1 talaq because the Quran says so and the sunnah says so. And he was punished for that. He was sent to prison. So Ibn Taymiyah rahmatullah alayhi, finally, to summarize very quickly, he died in prison. And this time when he went to prison for having that opinion on ziyarah, which I mentioned earlier, when he was in his 60s, he finished the Quran 82 times. 81 times the Quran was completely finished. Ibn Taymiyah read the Quran this time when he went to prison, the last time because he died in prison in the citadel of Damascus. He finished the Quran 81 times. He was reading it the 82nd time. He was reading the Quran the 82nd time when he reached the verse A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Innal muttaqina fi jannatin wa nahar. Innal muttaqina fi jannatin wa nahar. Fi maq'adi sidqin 'inda malikin muqtadirin. When he reached عند مليك مقتدر, when he reached this verse, Surah Waqia, Shaykh? No, Surah Waqia, yes? One before Surah Rahman. Which surah is this? The one before Surah Rahman. What is the surah before Surah Rahman? Qamar. Surah Al-Qamar. The last verse of Surah Al-Qamar, Ibn Taymiyah was reading on the chest of his brother. Allah took his soul in that form when he was reading this particular verse. And Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah, his student, was inside the prison with his Shaykh, and he gave the Shaykh gave his life in prison. Wallahi, I did not do justice to his legacy in this short lecture. Wallahi. Make the adhan inshallah, and we will continue after the adhan to finish the talk, and later on maybe we can do questions and answers inshallah. So I was talking about Ibn Taymiyah's death in prison. He was in prison for a number of issues he was facing due to his opinions. Unfortunately, he was put through that difficulty in his life, and he went through a lot of trials. But what was his legacy? Primarily his legacy was his own works which he penned, and they run into multiple volumes, and he left students behind with their own legacies. So what was the legacy of his students? His students, of course, I talked about them earlier. The best of his students were people who left behind huge works. Who were they? Ibn Kathir, Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah, Imam al-Dhahabi, and Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali. These were his students. And as for his works, he penned number of works on a number of different topics. Some of these works caused a lot of controversy at the time, and they are still used by a lot of people for a number of reasons. So one of the most important works he compiled, or his students compiled, was Fatawa, Al-Majmu'a Al-Fatawa, the collection of his rulings on matters. People sent him questions and he answered these questions. These Fatawa or these rulings run into multiple volumes. Depending on the publisher you follow, they can run into easily 30 volumes. A very, very important collection of Ibn Taymiyah's opinions on religious matters. Then he wrote a book titled Minhaj al-Sunnah al-Nabawiyah. This book was specifically written to respond to some of the questions raised by a Shia scholar called Ibn al-Mutahhar al-Hilli. Ibn al-Mutahhar had raised some questions about Sunni theology, and Ibn Taymiyah wrote this response titled Minhaj al-Sunnah al-Nabawiyah. This has to be read, anyone interested in Sunni Shia dialogue. Then he also wrote a book on Creed, Islamic Aqidah, Al-Aqidah Al-Wasatiyah. And this work also caused some controversy for Ibn Taymiyah, and this was partly one of the reasons as to why he went to prison once. Also another book is, which he wrote as a response to a Christian scholar who had written an attack on Islamic theology. Ibn Taymiyah wrote a response, Al-Jawab al-Sahih liman baddala din al-Masih, an authentic response to the one who has changed the religion of the Messiah. This is one of the most thorough and comprehensive treatment of Christianity on the part of a Muslim scholar during the Middle Ages. This was one of the best responses written at the time. One of the most detailed responses to Christian objections to Islam during the Middle Ages. Also, he had written a very large work on the reconciliation of religion and reason. And the book is titled Dar'u Ta'arrud Al-Aql Wal-Naql. In this book, Ibn Taymiyah argues or gives his reasons as to how religion and reason can be reconciled. Very, very powerful work, very huge work for you to study. Another book on Creed was written by Ibn Taymiyah called Al-Aqidah Al-Hamawiyah. Al-Aqidah Al-Hamawiyah. And he also wrote a book on Asma Sifat. So brothers and sisters, the list is very, very long, very lengthy. I recommend that you go and study the life of Ibn Taymiyah. And one of the biographies I strongly recommend is written by Muhammad Abu Zuhra, who has written a huge comprehensive biography on the life of Ibn Taymiyah. Hopefully you will study his life at length. This was a very short treatment, an introductory treatment to the life and the works of Ibn Taymiyah. This was no justice to his life and legacy. To do justice to his life and legacy, we need to do a series of lectures on each aspect of his life. about his works, about his life, as in someone who struggled against the evils of his time, and about his response to different issues that were raised during his time. All of these are different topics that can be addressed in different settings. So for now, I think this will suffice. Thank you so much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.